Thank you everyone for joining us today for the RelishCareers MBA applicant webinar series. We are really pleased today to be joined by Stacy Blackman, the president of Stacy Blackman Consulting. Before we get into the questions with Stacy, I'll share a little bit about her background. Stacy earned her BS in economics from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And after graduating, she began working in private equity at the Prudential Capital Group in San Francisco, and then went on to earn her MBA at the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern. Following business school, she tapped into her flair for invention and began building businesses, eventually launching Stacy Blackman Consulting, the leading admissions consulting advisory, which has helped thousands of MBA applicants gain admission to the most selective business schools in the world since its founding in 2001. Stacy also writes for the Strictly Business MBA blog for U.S. News and has published a book, The MBA Application Roadmap. You can find more information about that and these other resources at stacyblackman.com. Stacy, sounds like you're very busy, so thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And this webinar series is really intended for individuals at all stages of the application pipeline. And so we'll go through a series of questions to address each stage of that pipeline and get your insights and share them with our audience. So just to dive right in, the first question, this is kind of a two-parter, but for folks still researching schools and applying, how can they be sure that their target list of schools contains the right set for them? And what are some of the important criteria to consider that might get overlooked by some applicants when they're thinking about where to apply?
So there are so many different criteria to consider, and really there's no right criteria. It's what is important to you. So for one individual, it might be location, it might be the types of international programs they have, the size of the program, the teaching methods, what the culture is of the school. So there's all kinds of ways to look at these schools. And every individual needs to sit down and do some thinking and really reflect upon what matters to them. Come up with that list. You know, I want a small school on the East Coast that has a really strong marketing focus, you know, and through that, you'll start to narrow down. Of course, the other part of the equation is where can you actually get into school? So with that, we recommend choosing 4 to 6 schools and kind of doing the, you know, portfolio theory of there's never a shoe-in, but a less competitive school on one end and 1 or 2 reaches on the other end, and then some kind of more moderate picks in between. So taking a look at, you know, what's the average test score, what's the average GPA, what types of backgrounds does that school seem to gravitate towards, and then, you know, picking schools on that range that are a good fit for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think the portfolio strategy is always a good approach. Are there, you know, you listed a lot of sort of the individual things that folks look for. Are there, you know, I think people often look to rankings and some of the more obvious criteria. Are there any things that you think that some of the candidates that you work with sometimes overlook when evaluating schools?
Well, I think that most people rely too heavily on the rankings. And the thing to keep in mind with the rankings is that all of the rankings are different. When you talk about the top school or the top 5 schools, they're going to vary ranking to ranking. And if you're going to use the rankings in your decision-making process, you need to know what criteria are factored into the rankings. So some schools are asking prospective employers about, you know, to rank schools, or some rankings are asking prospective employers. Some are asking alumni and students. So, you know, think about what's important to you. And when you look at rankings, make sure that you understand what those rankings are taking into account as they're developed. But they can be a good starting point. It's a place to kind of scan and get a list, and then you need to dive in and do the heavier research. So, you know, maybe through the rankings, you choose a list of 10, 15, even 20 schools, and then you're going to go on the school's websites and go to these MBA fairs and visit the schools and talk to students, talk to alums, and, really get a feel for each program, what their strengths and weaknesses are relative to the things that you care about. And through that, you'll develop your list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice, and certainly something that we emphasize, that the rankings are really rankings for a one-size-fits-all audience, and it may not really be the rankings for the individual. So the next stage of the application pipeline that we want to talk about is prospects who have submitted their applications and are waiting to hear back from schools. Is there anything that they can do to improve their chances, or prepare for what's coming? What can they do? How can they spend their time most effectively?
So the interview is a really important part of the application. It's not going to necessarily make you, but it can definitely break you. So, you've put all this time into the application, you've developed this great profile, it's all in writing, and then you go in and you meet someone face to face and you just stumble and you can't talk and you can't answer their questions, and that's not a good thing. So my big piece of advice for interviews is, this is not like a magic bullet. It's actually just practice. You should be the expert of you. Nobody's going to tell you that what you're saying is wrong, but we're not used to telling stories about ourselves and reciting our work history and talking about our accomplishments. So, practice out loud, practice with someone, sit down with a friend and do mock interviews, do it in front of the mirror, look at yourself. At SBC, we have a video platform that all of our clients can practice on, and there are written questions on the screen and they answer them and they can watch themselves. And it's just so helpful, because honestly, the easiest question in the world should be, tell me about yourself. I mean, who better than you can answer that question about you? But that is the biggest stumbling block I see in interviews, that people go on and they ramble and they go off course, and the interviewer, the eyes start to glaze over. So get used to talking about yourself, being thorough yet succinct. And it's an art, but it's something that can be achieved with practice. For many of the schools, the answer there is, you got to just wait. You can really shoot yourself in the foot by reaching out to the schools, harassing them, wanting answers, providing updates. For many of the schools, you submit the application, the door is closed, and you really want to follow their rules and, not do anything else, even if you think that it might be helping your candidacy. There are some cases where maybe an update would be a smart move, and it kind of depends school to school. So if you increased a test score, maybe you can report that. There are some cases where you might have an influential alum who can write a letter on your behalf, someone who knows you well. Maybe that can go into the file later on. If you have a really significant update, maybe some schools will look at that. Beyond that, keep yourself busy, think positively, keep moving forward in your career and with your plans as if you are admitted to school, and hold tight and wait. It can be very nerve-wracking.
Yeah, absolutely. It can certainly be an anxious period. So I think, just being patient sometimes is the best advice. What about applicants or candidates who have heard back from multiple schools and received multiple acceptances? What are sort of the best ways to choose between two different offers, and how do folks balance things like ranking versus cost or financial assistance?
Yeah, again, this is a really personal thing. This is when you really need to sit down and dig deep and think about what is important to you. Some people have very, very specific career goals. They want to work in a very specific industry or even with a particular company. This is a time when I would pick up the phone and call that company or call some of the companies in the industry and find out what they think of the schools. and where they recruit and how this would play in the recruiting process. This isn't a time where if you haven't visited the schools, maybe it's time to do so, and really get a feel for the culture that's right for you, where you think you would thrive and grow and, advance your career the most. So, this is the time when you need to decide on those very clear criteria, what matters most, the financial side, the reputation, being close to family. It's a very personal thing.
Yeah, I like that idea of I think using employers as a guidepost if there are particular industries or particular companies that you want to end up with. Really investigating the different on-campus presences can make a big difference because, in business school, you may get into your dream school, but it may just happen to not be a target school for one of your dream employers. So, there are a lot of factors to consider there. So I think that's a great piece of advice to start looking ahead to the recruiting process.
That's kind of the thing is a lot of people think, I just got to get into business school. I just got to get in and then I'm set. But once you get in, it's kind of like the road has just begun. I mean, now it's your stepping stone to the career that you want and that professional path. So how disappointing to end up at a school, your dream number one school, and find out that school actually isn't going to show up on campus and they only do on-campus recruiting for the internship, and you're out of luck. So those calls, we've had a lot of situations where reaching out to HR at a company has been surprisingly instrumental in those decisions because, some schools are on the list or they're not, and they can give you a very clear answer.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Sort of related to the decision between multiple acceptances, for those students who are on wait list, are there best practices that you can share? And particularly if folks maybe, with the portfolio approach, were waitlisted at some of their more desirable programs, but accepted at a lower ranked program, what's the appropriate approach or expectation in that case?
So the wait list is, first of all, it's not necessarily a bad place to be, although it can feel like agony hanging out on the wait list and not having your answers. A lot of people do get into top schools off of the wait list. So if you're waitlisted, that you passed a major hurdle, and you're someone that they could see in the class, but they're just figuring out their numbers and how many of every demographic and slotting people in. So you have to wait a little bit longer. My number one rule with the wait list is, as I said earlier with applications, is follow the directions. So you can really damage your chances by being overzealous and aggressive and showing them how enthusiastic you are about the school when they've told you point blank they don't want to hear from you. And if you can't follow the directions on this waitlist process, they're going to start to have questions about your direction following skills altogether. So the number one thing is follow directions. Now, if the school will accept updates, there's a lot that you can do. And the first thing you want to do is let them know how excited you are to be on the wait list and that this is your number one school and you will attend if admitted. Because, the schools are managing their yields and their reputations for the rankings, and they want to know that if they extend an offer, you're going to admit. So communicate that clearly to the school. After that, there's an opportunity for all kinds of updates. And this is not a time to send them a letter saying, again, why you want to attend the school or reiterating your resume. Don't regurgitate information that's already gone into your application. But if you have something new, like a promotion or a really interesting new project, or even completing a triathlon or something, extracurricular community service, this is a time where you can let them know. You can also submit an additional recommendation. Again, not another person saying the same thing about you, but if there's someone who could maybe provide another perspective, or maybe it's a student or an alum, but be careful with these. Make sure that it is new information and that it's someone who's really in a position to speak about you. You may retake an exam, in which case you can send an improved score to them. Maybe you've taken a calculus class outside of work, an online course or an evening course, and you now have a grade to report. So there are all kinds of things that might improve your candidacy. And if the school wants to hear from you, you can update them. But be careful, be strategic, don't annoy them. It's a very delicate line that you have to be careful.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't as someone said to us the other day, who was a former career services director, don't become a pest. I think that's good advice. And I'm curious about this, just to follow up on that a little bit. If you have any guidance for your clients, and obviously one of the things we've learned through the series is the application process is very individual, but if you have any advice for your clients who are maybe waiting out a wait list but are admitted at other places, if there's sort of a time where it may be best to sort of prepare for a particular program or not.
Well, I think if you've accepted an offer from a program, you do your best on the side to get into the school that may be your number one school, but you proceed with that program and, get excited about it. And you can start networking with other admits, research the school, get to know some of the courses, opportunities there. What are the clubs? You invest and get psyched and get ready for a great experience. If things change, you scramble and you switch course. But yeah. I wouldn't advise kind of hanging on to that wait list hope, because you never know.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually leads into sort of the last stage that we want to ask about. And the question that we have here is for applicants who have decided on a school, they've accepted admittance, they're definitely going. But there's this long period in between that and the start of school. What can they do to prepare themselves for that experience in the months leading up to the start of the first year? And just generally, if you have any other advice for incoming MBAs looking to make the most of their business school experience.
So, in terms of what you can do in between the time you're admitted and you decide to go and when you actually start school, there are kind of two paths that you can take. One is, yay, I'm into business school. It's a sure thing. And I have, 5 months ahead of me and I can have some fun. And that's completely valid. Go travel, do some community service, explore, do some things that you wanted to do, because once school starts, you hit the ground running and you're going to be super busy. The other path, and, maybe you can do a mix of the two, is to really start thinking towards the next step. Because as I said, you're now into school and the work is only just beginning. Now you got to get the job or, figure out what you're going to do next. So now's the time maybe to take on a part-time job or an unpaid internship, start exploring career paths. Do what you can. If you're switching from finance into marketing, which is what I did, how can you make yourself a more desirable marketing summer internship candidate? Maybe you can start working 6 hours a week with a consumer packaged goods company, or, doing some consulting on the side. So there are things that you can do to really, be that much ahead when you start school. I don't suggest taking a lot of classes and, getting the credits. Like, that's what school's for. You'll get there and you'll get up to speed. They have great teachers. There are tutors, there are study groups. So I wouldn't spend those months, learning finance before everyone else so you can get the easy A. I would say explore the career stuff and be ready for that. And, have a little fun and enjoy and let your brain kind of wander and explore, because you're going to open it up to a whole new world of career possibilities and people, and you want to soak in as much as you possibly can. In terms of what you do once you get to school, go to class, listen, study hard, learn, and do well. But that's like a small percentage of the business school experience. I mean, you could probably get that in online classes or through a textbook. there's so much more. And so, my advice for really getting the most out of business school while you're there is go join clubs, do activities, interact with people that you wouldn't normally interact with, go to the conferences, go to corporate presentations that you don't even think you're interested in. Just like explore. Give yourself that time to look into new interests and career paths and ideas. Start a little side business on the side, get involved with some community service, just like use this time to be supported by this amazing faculty and student body and learn and grow. Because what I find for a lot of our clients is that they go with very specific career goals, and then they start school and they realize there's so much more, so many things that they never would have dreamed of doing. So give yourself that opportunity to really grow and learn from all of these exposures. Also remember that the people in your class may be different from you. You may not like all of them, but this is your network for life. 20 years later, there may be somebody that you shoot an email to because, they can introduce you to someone on LinkedIn, or they work at the company that you're trying to structure a deal with. So, in some ways that network gets really richer and richer and more meaningful. So remember that from day one, that this community is a really special community that you'll have forever.
Such good advice, I think, and certainly was my experience in business school as well. And the network, really, the value of the network can't be overstated, I think. So that's terrific advice for those incoming MBAs.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you for including me.